Good afternoon, everybody. I hope everyone's having a great day. It's October 31st, 2018. Happy Halloween to those who are celebrating stateside. This is Mohammed Abdul Kader. I'm the Executive Director of the Stevens Initiative at the Aspen Institute. We're very excited to be presenting this webinar today. I want to start off by congratulating all of you, because if you're here, you've been invited to submit a proposal for the next round of consideration for a Stevens Initiative grant to conduct some exciting virtual exchange activities between students in the United States and the Middle East and North Africa. I'm joined here today by the Stevens Initiative team, who will be running you through some of the considerations, things for you to keep in mind for the next stage of the application process. Again, I want to thank you all for all the time that you have spent putting forward some very creative and exciting proposals for both seeding and scaling. I do want to note this was an incredibly competitive field, so I want to just take a moment to congratulate you all and celebrate your work and your creativity in this process. Again, we're very proud of the Stevens Initiative, and we're proud of all of the folks that we've worked with up until now. They've done some really great work, and we hope to continue to build on that success going forward. So without any further ado, I'm going to turn it over to my team, to our team, Christine Schau and Henry Shepard, who will be walking you through some of the parameters of the competition. Thanks and have a great day.
Thanks very much, Mohammed. I hope you all can hear me loud and clear. This is Henry Shepard for the Stevens Initiative. I'm an assistant director on the team, and I'll start off by giving a general overview of the award competition and where we stand now at this full application phase. Christine will talk about some very important details on budget and compliance, on partnerships and the vetting of partnerships, on our branding and communications expectations, and then she'll turn it back over to me to talk about our increasingly important alumni engagement expectations, about how we hope to conduct monitoring and evaluation in partnership with our awardees, and about plans for sustainability and growth that we expect our awardees to be working on from the beginning of their awards. Then we'll go through a few questions and answers based on questions we received by email leading up to this webinar. And finally, after answering some of the live audience questions that you might submit, we'll try to outline a few steps that you might take to get more support from us as you work on your proposals. If you have any technical issues or logistical questions during this webinar, please type them in the chat box in the control panel of the GoToWebinar module. If you have any questions you'd like us to answer, please type them in the questions box. So that would be any questions about the competition itself or the proposal you're working on. Again, please type them in the questions box. We will go through them as we can and try to answer those that we think will best serve the group. We likely will not get to every question that's submitted today, or necessarily all of those that have been submitted by email up to today. If you feel like your question has not been answered, or if you have any follow-up questions, we hope that you'll please email us at stevensinitiative@aspeninstitute.org. So let's move on to the general overview. The application submission deadline for your full application is December 4th at 5 p.m. US Eastern Time. There are no exceptions or extensions to that deadline, so all materials need to be submitted and complete by then. This is the deadline both for the online form, which is the core of this proposal phase, as well as for the budget template, budget narrative, timeline, partnership list, and several other required or optional uploaded materials that we expect you to submit. All of these things need to be completed and submitted through the Fluid Review website, which you should be familiar with from your work on the letter of interest phase. What we have done is carried over your letter of interest to the full application phase so that you can continue refining your answers to those questions. We've also added several questions to the same form and renamed the form Full Application Form. So you should see several new prompts in the same form, and you can keep working on those prompts as well as work on the several uploaded documents that we expect. Once you've submitted your proposal by the December 4th deadline, we will share those proposals with an independent review committee made up by experts from related fields. The committee will review the proposals individually and using a score sheet and scoring rubric that we've provided them, make their scores and add written comments. And based on those scores and written comments and on feedback from our partners, the Stevens Initiative will recommend several applicants for an award. At that stage, we share the details of those proposals with our partners at the Department of State, who are obviously a leading sponsor of the Stevens Initiative. And we put all of the international and domestic partnerships through a vetting and review process. Alongside that, and based on the results of that vetting, we will conduct negotiations and dialogue with any organizations that we feel are suitable to work towards making an award. That may take several weeks depending on the circumstances, and we want to make sure that all of the details of the program are ironed out as well as possible before the start date. The start date for the awards would be on April 1st, 2019, and so we anticipate announcing and beginning the awards around that time, leading up to the implementation of virtual exchange beginning, in most cases, in fall 2019. I mentioned a moment ago that the review committee would be relying on selection criteria that we shared with them and that we shared online through the Fluid Review page. We've added text to the competition overview and guidelines page on Fluid Review to reflect any changes at the full application phase. And you can see on the slide that we're showing here what the expanded set of criteria are and what weighting they will have, because we have decided to weight the criteria depending on what we think their relative importance are at this phase. Several of these criteria should be familiar from the letter of interest phase, and some of them are new. And so very briefly, I'll just acknowledge that cost effectiveness is something that we've added at this phase explicitly. We've broadened the priority topic criterion to also just generally reflect the content of the proposal. We've added a criterion on the educator and facilitator plan, for example, on how they're recruited, trained, and retained as part of the plan. We've added a criterion on the quality of the implementing partnerships. We've added a criterion on the plan to meet the administration expectations that we've shared in several areas, and we'll get into those in successive slides. And we have split the growth and sustainability criteria to reflect the emphasis that we think should be placed on those factors. I'd now like to turn it over to Christine to talk about budget and compliance.
Great. Thank you, Henry, and hello to everyone. I'm Christine Shao, Assistant Director of the Stevens Initiative. I just want to thank you again for taking the time to be with us here today. The following slides are going to provide a preview to you of our expectations, but if you are awarded, we will have a more thorough onboarding call and can provide those details to you in depth. We think it's very important that you're aware of these expectations so that you can appropriately allocate the time and resources necessary to meet those objectives and deliverables of your program, and to hopefully provide a foundation for you to implement a successful program. I'm not sure if actually Henry mentioned this earlier, but our funding comes directly for this particular cohort from the Department of State. And as such, the funds are governed by a very specific set of regulations by the Office of Management and Budget, OMB. These are regulations listed within the Uniform Guidance, which is a US government-wide framework for grants management. You should definitely take the time and familiarize yourself with these regulations, as it touches on all areas of program work, from monitoring, reporting, spending, reallocating, and all other sorts of items. So definitely familiarize yourselves with them. To read from the slide, those particular regulations are going to be from OMB Circular 2 CFR 200 and OMB Circular 2 CFR 600. OMB Circular 2 CFR 600 are very specific regulations for the Department of State. On this side, you're going to see a basic structure of the flow from the Stevens Initiative as the managing partner at the Aspen Institute, and for you as a subrecipient of federal funds. Again, the Aspen Institute is the managing partner of the STEAMS initiative and is considered the pass-through entity. As the pass-through entity, the Institute is responsible for monitoring and guiding your work in order to help you achieve your deliverables in accordance with the terms and conditions of your award agreement. This includes your final approved application. Overall, it is our responsibility to make sure we are appropriately and effectively making use of federal taxpayer dollars. Just as something to note here is that you will often hear us refer to you as awardees, but technically, if you are approved for funding, you will become a subrecipient to the Aspen Institute. This basically means that everything that the Aspen Institute is required to adhere by as the pass-through entity, you will also be required to adhere to as well. On to budget and compliance specifically. As you think about your budgets, something to note is that any cost that you propose must align with your proposal and should meet the following criteria of allowable, reasonable, allocable, and necessary to conduct the activities outlined in your proposal. To briefly go over these definitions, allowable means that the cost should adhere to the federal cost principles and have consistent treatment through generally accepted accounting principles. Reasonable means that the objective individual would agree that the cost is appropriate for the work proposed and must be able to withstand public scrutiny and is necessary to complete the proposed work. Allocable are costs incurred to support the work outlined in the award, and all costs must be necessary to conduct the work. Disallowed and allowed costs. Disallowed costs are identified as charges to a federal award, or in this case, your subaward agreement, that the federal awarding agency or pass-through entity determines to be unallowable. One of the questions we've received specifically as it relates to disallowed or allowed cost has been around the funding and purchase of software for a study. To answer that question, yes, the purchase of software is allowable per the grant. But if any software is greater than $5,000 in unit cost, that will require our prior approval. If you are thinking of developing your own software, that is an entirely different conversation, and we generally do not feel favorable to that type of spending. What you see on this screen is basically the budget template. The top section is going to be considered the budget summary section, and we ask that you do not enter directly into that section. Those are going to automatically populate by what you enter into the section below called the budget detailed section. Within the budget detailed section, make sure that you are only entering in the blue sections. All of the white sections in the budget detail are formulas, so you definitely don't want to enter into those directly. You just want to let them auto-populate. You do not need to use every budget category listed in the template, but note you cannot add any new budget categories, so you kind of have to let the template stay as it is. And just to go over the categories a bit more in depth, personnel, salaries, and fringe benefits, that's pretty self-explanatory. Staff travel, pretty self-explanatory. Participant support, however, that is defined as direct cost for items such as stipends, travel allowances, and registration fees paid to or on behalf of participants or trainees, but not employees, in connection with the program, conferences, or any type of training projects. You may not reallocate from this line without prior approval from the Stevens Initiative. Equipment and supplies, we often have a little bit confusion about what should be budgeted in equipment or supplies. I can see equipment's not listed here, but supplies are basically anything that is going to be under the value of $5,000 per unit cost. Equipment, the reason it's not listed here is because it's generally not allowable on our prime award, but if you do find a need to purchase equipment, you should come to us first and we can discuss that. Contractor versus subaward. When you're making the determination between a contractor and a subaward, some things you might want to consider are the following. Typically, the characteristics of a contractor are going to be someone who's providing goods and services within normal business hours and they provide these goods and services to many different entities. A subrecipient is going to be an entity that's going to be carrying out a portion of your grant program, but is not considered an individual or a beneficiary of the program. As it relates specifically to contractor, if the contract is going to be greater than $150,000, I'm just highlighting to you all now that you need to make sure that those are competitively bid, and it also takes time for that process. So you should definitely plan for that as you're working on your general work plan, and also to account for that appropriately in the budget as so. Another question we had related specifically to personnel cost was whether or not there were restrictions or recommendations on how much of the overall budget should be in the budget category. As an example, are there a maximum percentage that can be allocated for personnel? Our answer to that is that there are not specific restrictions on how much should be allocated to staff of the prime organization, but personnel charges should be a fair representation of the majority work that the prime organization will be overseeing and conducting as a prime applicant. Considerations, however, must be made to the implementing organizations as well. So you want to make sure that the personnel charges being charged to the implementing organization of the prime organization are also an appropriate representation of their work to be conducted. To help illustrate, if you have an implementing organization who is conducting 45% of the work, and therefore take about 45% of the budget, all things equal, and considering you are not traveling or purchasing anything else on the prime budget, that the remainder of the budget would primarily be focused on personnel costs and indirect cost. But just keep in mind that whatever you are charging needs to be an accurate reflection of the work that will be completed by the prime. The travel. Travel is, as we mentioned, an allowable cost per the terms and conditions of the grant. There are, however, very specific and extensive requirements that must be met in order to travel on federal grant dollars, and specifically Department of State grant dollars. We will go over this in detail at a later date, but just to preview for it, we definitely require a lengthy amount of time when traveling, and we need to be notified in advance. And this will also include you completing a spreadsheet of traveler details. Failure to submit in a timely manner may result in the delay and sometimes postponement of any planned travel. Our guidance here is basically to be proactive when it comes to this, and we know that there's a lot of moving pieces, so make sure that you're thinking about this again when you're devising your timelines and you're planning for travel and you're budgeting for these costs. The next slide is going to show you an example. If you go to gsa.gov/per diem, which is where you can find the domestic federal lodging rates. As you can see from this example, if you were to travel to Chicago in August of 2019, your lodging would be capped at $183, which does not include taxes. So taxes are going to make it be more, and that's okay. Meals and incidental expenses, as you can see from the bottom section, are capped at $76 per day. But something to keep in mind is that if you are traveling, your first and last day of travel are going to be approximately 75% less than the full per diem. So you need to make sure to budget for that appropriately in the travel budget detail section. And also on that note, if you're going to be provided lunch and dinner from anyone else, you need to make sure to appropriately subtract those amounts from the full per diem amount, which is, as it's listed here, called meals and incidental expenses. If you have any questions about how to budget when it comes to travel, definitely feel free to send us an email, and we will be happy to provide guidance on how to budget there. Indirect costs. If you have a NICRA, the Aspen Institute must absolutely acknowledge your indirect cost rate. Whether that is a rate of 55% or 15%, we will honor it. If, however, as an institution, you wish to submit something that is less than your NICRA, the Institute will also be happy to accept that lower rate. And just to quickly kind of walk through the different options that we hear now that we specifically talked about the NICRA. If you don't have a NICRA, and to be clear, a NICRA is basically a negotiated rate between your organization and the United States government. If you don't have one, you are automatically eligible to receive the 10% de minimis rate. You may also elect to not collect indirect cost rates. And if you would like to negotiate a rate other than the de minimis, you need to negotiate directly with the Stevens Initiative, and we can work to discuss that with each organization as it's needed. The last bit that I will touch on here as it relates to budget is going to be on cost share. If cost share is submitted as part of the application, that's great. It is voluntary but not expected. Just note that it will be checked and verified from your records in a similar fashion to how we review financial reports. This brings me to the last slide relating specifically to general grants management, which is the reporting piece. Based on a risk assessment completed by the Stevens Initiative, you will be placed on either a monthly or quarterly reporting cycle and will be expected to submit your reports to us no later than the 15th business day following the quarter or the month. It's important that you spend a sufficient amount of time on those reports because it is an important mechanism that allows us to receive a lot of information at once in one document. You should be as detailed as possible in both reports, and again, expect to submit them no later than 15 business days after month or quarter end. And again, this is very important for you in terms of your planning and your timeline. Partnerships and vetting. We ask that you provide as much information as you can about the organizations and/or educational institutions who will be implementing partners in your program. You should list the potential partners that can be recruited for addition to the program or for replacement of partners that are unable to join. You also need to make sure that you are uploading letters of support from guaranteed partners if applicable. Relatedly, we've had a couple of questions related to the domestic and foreign subrecipient profile questionnaire. To be clear, the domestic subrecipient profile questionnaire or the foreign subrecipient profile questionnaire only need to be completed by the prime applying organization. We have found, however, that some organizations want to utilize these forms for their own partners, although we don't strictly require it. Some find it useful because they know that it's part of their responsibility as a subrecipient to the Aspen Institute to also flow down those type of monitoring and due diligence techniques. And you might find it useful to also have your partners complete the domestic or foreign subrecipient profile questionnaire, but you answer the question, it is not required. So no, it is not something that is required. The type of documentation that is expected really depends on your type of organization. Your organization may decide to engage by an MOU depending on the type of work that is going to be conducted. But generally, we ask that all implementing partners of the prime organization have a lower tiered subaward agreement between the prime organization and your partners. The lower tiered subaward agreement is going to be very similar to the agreement that you're going to receive from us as the prime organization. And again, it is our expectation that you carry over almost all of the terms and conditions listed on the prime subaward agreement to your lower tiered subaward agreement. But again, I say this and caution you because your own organization may have a different type of agreement. You may call it an MOU, but if it is an MOU and it doesn't have all of the terms and conditions we deem necessary, we will ask that you carry those over. This question has also been framed against the fact that no financial award will be offered to these schools. And I think our general suggestion or question for you here is to prompt you to think about the incentive being offered for these schools to ensure their participation, if not financial. You might find that you want to secure their participation engagement by offering a monetary amount. But again, we don't strictly require, but it's something for you to consider. And if that is the case, there certainly needs to be a governing document between you and the school, again, in the form of a lower tiered subaward agreement. We'll move on to the COM slide next. The Stevens Initiative works in very close collaboration with the Department of State and its Public Affairs section. We will provide a document that will outline the very specific requirements and provide guidance on delivering the items in the communications deliverable section. One item that we want to highlight now to you is the required logo usage and branding requirements. All public-facing or marketing materials must be reviewed and approved by the Stevens Initiative and must include the U.S. flag, the state seal, the Stevens Initiative logo, and the Aspen logo. Over the past few months, the Stevens Initiative has developed a digital and press strategy, and there is an expectation that those awarded will participate in this strategy as well. Some of the key items on the strategy are mentioned again in the deliverables section, which we will go over shortly. But we raise this to you now so you can ensure to dedicate the appropriate amount of resources you need to help us execute on this strategy. The overall goal is to highlight the work of each program and to overall raise awareness of virtual exchange and of the Stevens Initiative. Social media. You will be expected to use your Twitter, Facebook, and/or other social media platforms to help amplify the important work that you're doing, to engage with your audience and partners, and to engage with the Stevens Initiative. Impact stories. You're going to work closely with our comms team to help produce one impact story through the period of performance that highlights your work. This will be amplified on our website as well as through your own social media platforms, newsletters, and other tools. During the period of performance, you will also be expected to conduct press outreach in order to help us achieve some press coverage through local outlets. Professional photos are a requirement of this award, and you will be required to submit at least approximately 40 photos throughout the period of performance that will be used for a variety of things, including submitting them to the State Department, awardee publications, general social media, website, and through the newsletter as well. You will also be expected to submit and capture video footage that meets our guidelines. Some footage will be taken from the Stevens Initiative and created into a professionalized video about your program and the Stevens Initiative work more generally, but this will be made on a case-by-case basis. Just to reiterate, you will be expected, however, to capture raw video footage. One of the questions we received has been on the intended audience for sharing impact. The intended audience for the Stevens Initiative per our digital strategy is basically education leaders, young people, policymakers, and alumni. If you are generating an impact story as part of your award, we can work with you to identify what target audience you want to reach through the impact story, and I'm hoping that there's probably going to be some overlap between our intended audience and your intended audience. I'm going to turn it over now to Henry to speak a little bit about alumni engagement.
Great. Christine, can you hear me okay? Hopefully that's a yes. Well, I'll rely on my colleagues to let me know if I'm not loud and clear. I'm happy to talk a little bit about alumni engagement, which is an area of increasing emphasis for us on the Stevens Initiative. We know how important it is to extend and deepen the impact of our programming on the people who go through the programs as participants. And we know how much those participants have to give back to the virtual exchange community and how much they can help us raise the profile of this very promising method of exchange. And so to that end, we are asking applicants to explain in their proposals, both in the application form, in the timeline, and then backed up in the budget where needed, how they will do some of the following things with us. First, we expect awardees to work with us to share resources and networks, to share the opportunity with their alumni to join the Stevens Initiative Alumni Network and also that of the Department of State exchange community more generally. We expect awardees to work with us to share their participant contact information so that we and our partners at the Department of State can follow up with and engage those alumni in the future. We expect awardees to work with us to regularly report alumni success stories with the Stevens Initiative. And we expect awardees to work with us to provide their own opportunities to their alumni throughout the award cycle, so that people who go through the program throughout the period of performance have opportunities to continue their learning, continue their engagement with their peers, and to find ways to give back to the community. Again, the expectations for alumni engagement, we try to prompt applicants to think about this and present thoughtful plans in the application form itself, and we look forward to working closely with anyone that we pursue an award with during the negotiation phase and early on in the period of the award. I'd like to talk briefly about monitoring and evaluation. And just as a brief overview of our work, the Stevens Initiative is conducting what we call it, or what is called, a developmental evaluation of the work of our awardees, as well as the work of the Stevens Initiative itself. And that means, in simple terms, that we think it's very important to take a collaborative approach, that we not be standing at a distance and rendering judgments, but that we be working together as a community to understand what seems to be working, what seems to be promising practices across the field of virtual exchange, so that we can learn and share what we're learning and hopefully help the field grow. This work is supported by independent evaluators who partner with the Stevens Initiative and do a variety of tasks to help us support quantitative analysis as well as qualitative analysis. So that's everything from survey-based data collection using a common survey framework to interviews, focus groups, reflections, site visits, and so on. And we certainly expect and allow awardees to have a variety of evaluation approaches, but we do expect some very important common methods of monitoring the quality and consistency of programming, and some participation in the methods that we all share. For example, the common survey items that we expect to be posed to participants throughout the program. The independent evaluators help us by reviewing this information, trying to put it together in compiled reports, and then sharing their observations and recommendations with awardees, very much, again, in a sort of a partnership effort. And now I'd like to very briefly touch on the impact evaluation supplement. This is an opportunity that we've extended to a few awardees based on their answers to the letter of interest questions. So you should know who you are if you've been invited to submit the impact evaluation supplement. This is an opportunity for a few awardees to potentially go beyond the standard expectations of monitoring and evaluation and conduct a quasi-experimental design that will help us learn more about the impact of these programs. So we expect these organizations to have some experience evaluating and conducting virtual exchange, and if we find the idea worthy, we would make available a supplemental budget of between $50,000 and $125,000 to conduct some additional evaluation work. These could include, based on some questions we've received, I want to acknowledge that these could include some costs for the dissemination of the outcomes of the impact evaluation, though these should be very limited because the initiative will play a leading role in the dissemination of findings. These could include some staff time or some travel time if observations are required, but again, any kind of travel or anything like that should be limited, and virtual observation should be used whenever possible. There may be specific restrictions on other items that we can and cannot cover. So if you have any more detailed questions about allowable costs for this impact evaluation supplement or anything else related to evaluation, you should please email us at the email address that we stated earlier and that we'll post again at the end of this presentation. I'd like to briefly turn to the topic of sustainability and growth. I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation that we have emphasized growth and sustainability as selection criteria at this stage of the competition because we think it's important that awardees have a growth and sustainability mindset throughout the period of performance so that we can hopefully work with you to find a pathway to grow your program and to help it reach more people more effectively in the time after the award, because it's very important to us to see programs that thrive and extend far beyond whatever reach we've attained by working together. And so we expect applicants to describe concretely what they would do during the period of performance to pursue other funds and other means of partnership and support beyond the Stevens Initiative time. We expect to see specifics about fundraising approaches, partnerships, and anything that you can do to find allies at your own organization or elsewhere that can help you find a pathway to grow and sustain your program. We're happy to talk more about what these pathways might be, but it was common feedback from our review committee that the vision and pathway to attaining growth and sustainability were vague in many cases. So we encourage you to be as specific as possible so that you have a work plan to follow. The actions that you put down should be reflected in the timeline you upload so that we can all work together to make sure we're on track to be as close to where we want to be as possible by the end of the award. And again, any effort or work that would be done in the area of sustainability and growth should be reflected in the budget. We know that this will take time and effort, and we think that it's important that it be resourced accordingly. We'd like to go through a few questions that we received by email in advance of this webinar, and then turn to the public questions that have been posted online. So again, if you do have any additional questions, please type them in the questions box. We've received several already, and we look forward to going through as many as possible. And I'll turn it over to Christine to start with a few questions we received in advance.
Thanks, Henry. Thank you, Henry. I'm actually going to turn back to a question not directly on this Q&A, but I didn't get to it in my previous discussion. One of the questions we received was, we partnered with more than a dozen high schools in the US and are planning to expand this list to include a diverse population of students, including those from Title I schools. It will take time to identify the eligible and qualified partner schools. Will it be sufficient to provide a list of current partner schools, as an example, 75% of the total expected partner schools, and secure new partnerships in early 2019 if awarded? And to answer that, yes, that is an acceptable way to submit your documentation to us. We again encourage you to provide as much detail possible in the partnerships vetting table. Who should be providing letter of support, and what should the letters include? The letters of support can be from current partners or proposed partners as it relates to your project and or program. The second question we've had is related to annual reports to date. If you do not have an annual report, it's absolutely okay not to submit anything. If there's any type of documentation you want to give us that gives us a sense of the type of programs that your organization currently funds, or anything that you think would be of interest for us to see, we're definitely happy to see that.
We received a question about whether an institution's status as a minority serving institution has a bearing on this call for proposals. And the answer is that it doesn't have, strictly speaking, have a direct bearing on the status of an application, but we would remind you that reaching diverse participants is a priority and a selection criterion for us in this competition. And so if an organization is well positioned to reach diverse participants, and that has a variety of meanings depending on the context, and we try to preview those in the call for proposals. If an organization is able to reach participants that are priorities for us, regardless of their specific status, that might be something that the applicant would want to reflect in their proposal. Moving on to the next slide. Someone asked if it's acceptable to enroll new cohorts of students during the 2020-2021 academic year, which is to say the second year of this 2-year award. And the answer is absolutely. And I think we owe a bit of a clarification here. We expect awardees to run this program for several cohorts of participants over the course of the 2 years of the award. So there are there are at least 4 academic terms covered, although really a 5th. So there's the full 2019-2020 academic year, summer 2020, and then the academic year 2020-21. And we expect new participants to be joining the program and getting this experience throughout that time. So it's not the same participants over the course of the 2 years. It's up to each applicant to decide how long the program should be for any one participant. But it's common for proposals to suggest work that runs for several weeks, up to maybe a semester or a bit more. And so that would allow an organization to run this for several cohorts of participants. Next question is whether there needs to be a uniform process for ethical research review, and if it's okay for there to be costs associated. And we look to each organization to determine the research standards that their community and their institution require of them. For several, that might be an IRB. For others, it might be different. And we look to you to explain to us what those requirements are. And we will work with you and with our independent evaluators to make sure that the research methods meet our standards as well. Third, there's a question about whether the experimental design should be focused on quantitative data. And again, this is specific to the impact evaluation supplement. We do expect the experimental or quasi-experimental design to be focused primarily on the more quantitative survey-based approach, but other more qualitative angles are welcome too.
We had a question about whether the curriculum should be submitted, in what type of format the curriculum should be submitted. And the short answer is that we will accept it in whatever format it exists. We also had a question regarding cost per participant and if it is within the allowed range. Does the STEAMS initiative have a preference for lower versus higher cost per participant? Will higher cost per participant be a negative factor in the assessment of the proposal? We do have cost effectiveness as one of our selection criteria, and cost per participant is a part of that. And we do prefer programs that have a lower cost, but we also know that reasonable costs may vary depending on the unique circumstances of each proposed program. Also, if you have evidence that costs will decrease as the program grows, that's also quite favorable.
An applicant asked, said on the list of tasks that they don't see the application form that's referenced in the guidelines, and can we confirm whether there is a narrative application form in addition to the supporting documents? And the answer is that there is an application form. It should be visible very much at the center of the fluid review page where you see all of the different tasks required. It should be called full application form scaling if you're filling out a scaling award, or full application seating if you're filling out a seating award. One thing that might be confusing is that it might be marked with a complete button, a little green button that says complete, because we've carried it over from the letter of interest phase and just renamed it and added more questions to allow you to build on your earlier answers. So that might have been complete at the letter of interest phase, but we've reopened it so that you can keep working on it at this phase. So ignore that green complete button and click edit and keep working on the form, because several new questions have been added. So yes, there is this online application form. It's not a Word document to be uploaded. It's a form that you work on online, just like the letter of interest.
We've also got a couple questions about MOUs from partners, and asked whether or not we can clarify a little bit more about what we're looking for, and whether or not a letter of commitment can be substituted instead of an MOU. And the answer is yes. It kind of depends on the status of your partnership. If it's formalized and solidified, it seems as though an MOU is something a little bit more official, so it would be beneficial for you or be relevant for you to submit it as an MOU. Letters of commitment seem to maybe make more sense if you guys are in early discussions about your partnership and you guys are looking towards solidifying that partnership, and letter of commitment is also acceptable too. We've also had a question on letters of endorsement or support and whether or not we can clarify what we're looking for here. Just to reiterate, it's not required that you submit a letter of endorsement or support, but if you think there are letters or documentation that you can provide to us that aren't directly related to your partners and or future partners, and you feel that it would be good for you to gather those, you may do so as well.
We've received a few questions about what the recent program evaluation uploads should be, whether that is specifically referring to any particular kind of document. And the answer is we certainly welcome anything that you think meets this standard of being a document about your program evaluation. The more rigorous or thorough, I think, the better, but we welcome any kind of internal or independently conducted evaluation report or document in that slot. It is an optional upload. It's not a required upload. I think now might be a good time for us to turn it over to questions that have been submitted online as we've been conducting this presentation. We have many more than what we'll be able to get to in the next 13 minutes, but perhaps we can start with a few, and I'll take a couple and then turn it over to Christine for others. We have a question: can you confirm if teachers or facilitators should be counted as participants? In most cases, yes. Teachers and facilitators should be counted as participants for the sake of budgeting and compliance matters. We don't typically count teachers and facilitators as the youth participants. So there are several parts of the application where we ask, please list the number of youth participants to be included. And unless teachers or pre-service teachers are part of that youth participants group, which I suppose could be the case in some programs, you shouldn't be counting them in those tables. But we do, for the purposes of travel and budget and other matters like that, they would be considered participants.
I wanted to revisit the letter of support very quickly and to mention that there isn't something specific. To be clear, we do not have a template for you to use. I think the letter of support and what's written in the letter of support is really going to depend on who you are going to ask someone, who you are asking to write that letter of support for you. So it's going to vary based on your relationship with that organization, but we don't have something specific. I think you just need to think about what would be beneficial for you in this application process and to convey that appropriately so to that organization. I also wanted to address a couple questions as it related to the budget. There are some longer ones that I can't get to here, but just to reiterate, how long is the maximum period of performance? The maximum period of performance is April 1st, 2019 through June 30th of 2021. We've also had a question on whether or not we can potentially provide a template and or samples of some already completed templates, and we can do so, and we'll do so on a case-by-case basis. If you think that's something that will be helpful to you, we can definitely do that.
I see a related question, Christine, about when applicants will get the template for the budget. And I should point out that all of the templates that are required have been uploaded and pre-populated into the Fluid Review site itself. So in the prompt where you're asked to upload the budget or the budget narrative, the timeline, the partnership list, all of those have a link within the question that will allow you to download the relevant template, fill it out, and then re-upload it. There was another question, sorry, Christine, if I jumped up too soon, but someone asked if we can say how many proposals we received in the first round and how many are going on to the next round. And very briefly, we received several dozen proposals in the first round, and less than half of them have gone on to this phase. So we don't want to be too much more specific than that, but it's needless to say, it's a very competitive process.
We have a question on whether the funds are 100% from the federal government, and yes, we can confirm that 100% of the funds are going to be from the US federal government. We also had an additional question on what determines monthly versus quarterly reporting requirements. As I mentioned earlier, as we look to onboard you, we'll also be conducting an internal risk assessment, and that's going to be largely based upon the either foreign or domestic subrecipient profile questionnaire that you submit, along with a review of your financial documents as well. There's an additional question on whether cost share is meant to be between sub and prime awardees. I'm not sure if I entirely understand, so I'll do my best, but if the question is whether or not cost share can exist between the sub and prime awardees, yes, that is definitely something that can exist between your arrangement between you and your sub recipients. But cost share on the prime agreement itself, if you're looking to include that on the prime agreement and on your budget as the prime applicant, it's not necessarily meant in that way. So I think, I'm not sure if I was specific enough what that meant. It probably made it a little bit more confusing, but if you have additional questions on that, we can talk offline further.
There's a very helpful question here. Can we revise preloaded text to meet current status of project? And the way I interpret this is, each organization has submitted a letter of interest, and as I mentioned, we've carried the questions and answers from that phase onto this full application phase. So when you log into Fluid Review, you will see those answers still there. And yes, the answer is we definitely do expect that as your plan evolves, that you will refine your answers to those existing questions from the earlier phase to make sure that everything that you have in your portfolio when you click submit on December 4th is accurate and up to date and the best plan that you can put forward. Now, we don't expect applicants to make wholesale changes to their proposal because we've invited you to continue in this process based on the proposal you put forward. So the proposal should very closely resemble what you put forward initially. But any refinements or iterations based on your own thinking, based on feedback from partners, are welcome. This is a good time to mention that we also, in our initial notification to you, told you that we would be providing some written feedback to each finalist to help them understand the perspective of our independent review committee. And we haven't forgotten about this. We are still refining and working on our final draft of these bullet points, which we hope to share as soon as possible. So this feedback from our review committee might prompt some refinements or changes to your plan, and those are, of course, welcome.
We had a question on whether or not, as a recipient of Stevens Initiative funds, if you will be required to report to Stevens Initiative on a quarter or per round basis. And just to be clear, you may be required to report to us on an official basis on a monthly and or quarterly basis. But that's not to say that we're not going to be in contact or have frequent check-ins with you. We're just saying the official mechanism by which you will submit a formal report to us will be no more frequent than monthly, but it will depend on the subrecipient, you as a prime applicant itself.
Christine, might it be okay, and you can tell me if I'm wrong about this, but I think the monthly reporting would be only for financial, is that right? Or would it also be for program progress?
That is absolutely correct, Henry. Thanks for clarifying that. Yes, the monthly reporting would only be for financial reports. The progress reporting, unless you are notified otherwise, will always be on a quarterly basis.
And to take it further, it's also possible that some of the data that we expect, for example, about completed rounds of virtual exchange, might not be needed on a quarterly basis because you might not be running a new round of your program every quarter. And so for evaluation reports and for tracking your participants, typically we would expect the report on the outcome of each round of exchange to be submitted at the quarterly report deadline that follows the conclusion of your program. So if you were running a fall program, we would expect the data about those participants to be submitted at the end of the fourth quarter. So that would be by January 15th of the following year. And thanks very much for it. It's a very helpful question.
Henry, we had a question about alumni. I'm not sure. Did you want to take that one right now before we move on?
I'll do my best.
Okay.
So the question is, when we speak about alumni, do you mean Stevens alumni or alumni of our institutions? So this might clarify it a bit. We look at people who go through the virtual exchange program that we support to be both alumni of your institution and your program, as well as alumni of the Stevens Initiative, and on a broader level, as alumni of a Department of State exchange as well. And that's why we're all going to work together to make sure that your plans to engage them are consistent with our hope to support and engage them going forward, as well as our commitment to help the Department of State engage them in their network as well. So it really is going to be a collaborative effort where we hope everyone works together to help empower and engage these young people.
Thanks, Henry. We had a question about software development costs. I think this is in response to what I said earlier about how we generally don't fund those types of things. The question specifically is whether or not personnel costs can technically be integrating into existing applications. And I think if what I'm understanding correctly, it's saying you're not proposing to develop software, but rather take software and have folks on your staff integrate that into an already existing platform. And those types of personnel costs are allowable because we wouldn't view that as software development costs, but rather a function of someone who works on IT and would be working to help you integrate whatever it is that you're purchasing into an existing platform.
We have a question about whether current geopolitical issues should be taken into account when designing a proposal. And as the question implies, these issues are fast changing and sometimes very difficult to deal with. And I think the best advice we can give is that the priorities we listed in the call for proposals, the interest in reaching young people in certain countries in the Middle East and North Africa that are particularly challenging to reach through other means of international engagement, those remain priorities for us. We expect organizations to put forward plausible, appropriate, safe plans to connect young Americans and young people in these countries. We recognize that these could take additional effort, that additional safeguards need to be made to make sure that participants in any country, especially these countries, need to be supported as well as possible. And so nothing has changed, but we do expect applicants to be mindful of these geopolitical challenges and also to present plans that show that they are resilient and responsive to the changing landscape.
We have a question on whether partners that require lower tiered suborder agreements are only parties to whom we are supplying funds and fall under the subaward section of the budget. I think on the face value of this question, the response would technically be yes. It would be a partner that you are giving funding to, and that does fall under the subaward section. But what's important to note here is the distinction between who you are deciding to categorize as contractual versus subaward. So it's not just the means of saying, okay, I would like to put this under subaward, I want to put this under contractual, but really doing the due diligence to determine, based on the work that they're proposing to conduct for you, if they should actually be a contractor or if they should be under subaward.
I'm looking through now and I'm trying to determine which questions are not duplicative with what we've tried to answer before. And I'll just remind you that we're coming up on the end of our time here. It's possible that we have time for just maybe another answer, doing our best. There is a question here about whether additional lines can be added to the budget, for example, the travel budget. And Christine, correct me if I'm wrong, but if any additional lines are needed on the budget in any section, applicants should feel free to add them. They should keep in mind, as I understand it, that you have put formulas in the template. And so any formula, any additional lines would need to make sure that they carry over those formulas to make sure they compute properly.
Yeah, that's very clear. That's accurate, Henry. But also, if you look on the travel detail worksheet itself, you'll see a little arrow on the left-hand side. And if you open that arrow, it's going to expand and open for more rows for you. So they're already there. I just hid them because not everyone travels, so I didn't want it to take up too much room on the worksheet itself.
Even better answer. Thanks, Christine.
Sure.
I think it's time for us to wrap, just to make sure we're respectful of everyone's time. And so I'd ask to turn to the final slides of this presentation. Thank you so much for being with us. We hope this has been helpful. We know that this really scratches the surface, and we recognize that there are likely questions that we did not get to that would benefit all of you. We will be posting a recording of this webinar on our YouTube channel, sharing a link to it in our competition website on Fluid Review. We will be very interested in receiving any additional questions you might have at the email address we've been using throughout this process. To learn more about the Stevens Initiative generally, you can go to our website, our Facebook page, our Twitter channel. We have shared several resources that we think might be helpful to applicants on the resources page of our website. The link is provided here. We encourage you to learn more about virtual exchange by reading those documents, by watching our past webinars, looking at the programs we've supported in the past, and so on. To the next slide. Again, the application website is aspen.fluidreview.com. We'll be adding questions to the already existing frequently asked questions page based on what we received and what we covered during this webinar. Again, if you have any new questions as a follow-up to the questions posed here, or if there's anything that we missed, we encourage you to please email us as soon as you can at stevensinitiative@aspeninst.org, and we will try to give you the best answer possible. We prefer email correspondence over phone calls. And so we ask again that you please contact us by email. Going to the final slide, thank you again very much for joining us, or thank you for watching this recording. If you're watching a recording, the deadline is to submit your full application is December 4th at 5 p.m. US Eastern Time for all materials. And all of those materials and forms need to be filled out and completed on aspen.fluidreview.com. So on behalf of the team, thank you so much for being with us. Thanks for your time and attention. We hope it's been helpful, and we wish you a very good day. Bye-bye.